Welcome back, everybody. This is week 7 of the 2025 Bluewater Auto Restoration Podcast.
Right.
We release new podcasts every Saturday morning, so
Yeah.
tune in here for all your classic car news.
For sure.
We get a lot of questions about upgrading car suspensions.
Yeah.
And it seems like everyone wants to know air suspension or coilovers. Which one reigns supreme?
Right. Big question.
Well, our friends at Bluewater Auto Restoration gave us some great insider info, so
Okay.
we can break it all down for you today.
It's a question as old as time itself, isn't it?
Right.
Okay. Maybe not that old, but in the car world, it's a debate that comes up all the time.
Yeah,
And for good reason.
for sure.
Both systems can totally change how your car looks, feels, and performs.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Sure.
First, can you give us a quick breakdown of each system?
Yeah.
I know people throw around terms like air ride, but I'm not sure everyone really gets what's going on under the hood.
Absolutely. So with air suspension, you're essentially replacing those traditional metal coil springs with these super durable rubber airbags.
Okay.
These airbags are hooked up to an onboard air compressor, air lines, and a control center.
So instead of metal springs, you've got these airbags doing all the heavy lifting.
Yep.
Right. But how do you actually control the ride height?
That's where the control center comes in.
Okay.
It lets you adjust the air pressure in those bags whenever you want, meaning you can literally raise or lower your car with the push of a button.
Wow.
Pretty cool, right?
Okay. That's where the term air ride comes from.
Exactly.
And that explains why you see those cars dramatically dropping at car shows.
Yep.
But it can't be all show, no go, can it?
Right.
How does air suspension actually handle on the road?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it really depends on the specific system and how it's set up.
Okay.
A well-tuned air suspension can actually provide a surprisingly smooth and comfortable ride.
So it's not just about slamming your car to the ground. You can actually adjust it for different driving conditions.
Exactly. You have a lot of control over the ride stiffness.
Uh-huh.
Imagine you're cruising along and then you load up your car with passengers or gear.
Right.
With air suspension, you can adjust the pressure on the fly to compensate for that extra weight.
Yeah.
It keeps things smooth and prevents you from bottoming out.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
It sounds like air suspension offers a lot of flexibility.
it does.
But what about coilovers?
Yeah.
They use those traditional coil springs, right?
Right. No airbags here.
So no fancy airbags or push-button controls.
But coilovers aren't just your grandpa's coil springs.
Right.
Think of them as coil springs with a serious upgrade. They're adjustable,
Okay.
so you can still fine-tune your ride height, but it's not as simple as pushing a button.
Right.
You'll need to get your hands dirty and use some tools.
Ah, so a bit more hands-on.
A little bit, yeah.
That's interesting. But if coilovers also let you adjust ride height, how do they compare to air suspension in terms of that adjustability?
Well, with coilovers, you're usually making those adjustments manually, often by physically spinning the spring perches to change the preload.
Okay.
So it's a more involved process and not something you can do on the fly like with air suspension.
So if you like to constantly tweak your ride height, air suspension sounds like the way to go.
Pretty much, yeah.
But I'm guessing there's more to coilovers than just ride height, right?
There is.
What adjustments can you make?
You're right. Coilovers offer a lot more than just ride height adjustment.
Mhm.
Some allow you to tweak things like camber and compression.
Okay.
These adjustments can have a big impact on how your car handles.
Interesting.
It's like fine-tuning your car for specific driving styles and conditions.
Wow, that's a level of control I hadn't even considered.
Right.
But I have to add, more adjustments also mean more things that could potentially go wrong.
There's always that possibility. But that's where choosing a quality coilover system and having it professionally installed makes a huge difference.
Right. So we've got these two systems, both offering adjustable ride height, but in very different ways.
Right.
What are some of the other key differences drivers should consider when making this decision?
Well,
I mean, besides just the mechanics of it all?
ride quality and handling are huge factors to consider.
Okay.
And they're both areas where air suspension and coilovers have their own unique strengths and weaknesses.
Let's talk ride quality first.
Okay.
Air suspension has that whole push-button adjustability thing going for it. But how does it actually feel on the road? Is it as smooth and luxurious as people say?
You know, that's one of the biggest misconceptions about air suspension. People think it's all about looks.
Right.
And that it sacrifices ride quality for that slammed aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
But a well-designed air suspension system can actually be incredibly comfortable, even more so than traditional coil springs.
So it's not just about being able to adjust on the fly.
Nope.
It can actually provide a better ride overall.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Those airbags can absorb bumps and imperfections in the road much more effectively than traditional steel springs, especially over rough surfaces.
Interesting.
And because you can adjust the air pressure, you can fine-tune the ride to be exactly how you want it, from super plush to a bit more sporty.
Okay, now that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing with air suspension.
Right.
You can really tailor it to your preferences.
Exactly.
What about coilovers?
Yeah.
How do they compare in terms of ride quality?
Coilovers tend to offer a firmer, more performance-oriented ride.
Okay.
They're designed to minimize body roll
Mm-hmm.
and provide that connected to the road feeling that driving enthusiasts love.
Okay, so coilovers are more for the driver who wants to feel every nuance of the road.
Precisely.
Okay.
And because they offer that precise control over things like camber and compression,
Mm-hmm.
you can really dial in the handling characteristics to match your driving style and the type of roads you typically drive on.
So it sounds like there's a trade-off here.
Yeah.
Air suspension for comfort and adjustability, and coilovers for that sportier, more connected feel.
Yeah, for sure.
But wouldn't that firmer ride with coilovers make for a pretty bumpy experience on rough roads?
That's definitely a consideration.
Yeah.
Coilovers can transmit more road imperfections to the cabin.
Right.
So if you live in an area with rough roads or prioritize comfort over performance,
Right.
you might want to lean toward air suspension.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's all about finding that balance between performance and comfort.
Yep.
But let's be honest.
Yeah.
A lot of people modify their suspensions to change the way their car looks.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? Well, there's nothing wrong with that. After all, part of the fun of owning a car is making it your own.
Exactly.
Right.
So in the looks department, which system takes the crown?
Well, when it comes to that dramatic, show-stopping look, air suspension is the undisputed king. There's just something about being able to drop your car to the ground with the push of a button that turns heads.
Yeah, you can't deny that air suspension has that wow factor.
Right.
But is that slammed look always the best choice? I mean, sometimes a subtly lowered stance on coilovers can be just as stylish.
You're absolutely right. Sometimes less is more.
Yeah.
And a well-chosen coilover setup can give your car a sleek, aggressive look without being over the top.
Okay.
It really depends on your personal style and the overall look you're going for.
So it's not just about how low you can go.
Nope.
It's about finding the right stance for your car and your taste.
Exact.
I like that.
Yeah.
But let's get real for a second. All this cool technology and customization can't be cheap.
Right.
What are we talking about in terms of cost for these systems?
Cost is definitely a major factor to consider.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, coilovers tend to be the more budget-friendly option, at least up front.
So you get more bang for your buck with coilovers?
Yeah, generally.
Yeah. What makes air suspension so expensive?
Well, air suspension systems involve a lot more components. The airbags, the compressor, the control module, all those airlines, and they require a more complex installation process.
Right.
So you're paying for the added technology and the labor involved in getting everything set up properly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So coilovers are generally less expensive to buy and install. But what about the long-term costs? Like, what about maintenance?
Yeah.
Are there big differences there?
That's an important point to bring up.
Yeah.
When it comes to long-term maintenance, coilovers tend to be simpler and less expensive to maintain.
Okay.
They're essentially a more robust version of traditional coil springs.
Right.
So there are fewer parts to wear out or break.
So less to worry about with coilovers.
Generally, yeah.
What about air suspension? I imagine those airbags and all that extra stuff could lead to more maintenance headaches, right?
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Air suspension systems have more points of failure, and those airbags do have a limited lifespan. They'll eventually need to be replaced, and that can be a costly repair.
Right.
You also need to keep an eye on the compressor and airlines for leaks or damage.
Okay, so with air suspension, you're paying a premium for that adjustability and cool factor.
Yeah,
But you might also be in for more maintenance down the road.
it's possible.
So is it safe to say that coilovers are generally more reliable in the long run?
That's a fair assessment.
Okay.
Coilovers are known for their durability and longevity.
Right.
They can handle a lot of abuse, making them a popular choice for performance driving and even off-road applications.
So if you're looking for a set-it-and-forget-it kind of suspension upgrade, coilovers might be the better choice.
Potentially.
But what about installation? Which system is easier to install?
Installation is another area where coilovers often have an advantage.
Okay.
In many cases, it's a fairly straightforward swap out with the old struts with the new coilovers.
So a skilled DIYer could potentially tackle a coilover installation themselves.
Absolutely, yeah.
What about air suspension?
Air suspension installations are significantly more complex.
Okay.
You're routing airlines, dealing with electrical wiring, potentially even fabricating custom mounting brackets.
Right.
It's definitely not a job for the faint of heart,
Right.
and it's often best left to the professionals.
Okay, so if you're not a seasoned mechanic, air suspension installation is probably best left to the experts. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But there's one more thing I'm curious about: safety.
Okay.
Are there any safety considerations specific to either system?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
and one that often gets overlooked. Both systems can be perfectly safe if they're installed and maintained correctly,
Right.
but there are some potential risks to be aware of.
Like, what kind of risks are we talking about?
With air suspension, the biggest concern is an air leak.
Yeah.
If an airbag develops a leak, your car could suddenly drop, which could be dangerous, especially at speed.
Right.
That's why it's crucial to have a reliable air management system
Right.
and to regularly inspect the airbags and lines for any signs of wear or damage.
So regular maintenance is key with air suspension to ensure it's working safely.
Absolutely.
What about coilovers? Any safety concerns there?
With coilovers, the main risk is improper installation or adjustment.
Okay.
If coilovers aren't installed correctly, or if they're adjusted too low, it can affect your suspension geometry and potentially lead to handling issues.
So it's crucial to have them installed by someone who knows what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it's important to follow the manufacturer's recommendations for ride height adjustments.
Okay.
Don't just go as low as possible because it looks cool.
Right.
You need to consider things like ground clearance and suspension travel to ensure your car handles safely and predictably.
Great points. So it sounds like both air suspension and coilovers can be safe and reliable options if they're installed and maintained properly.